Okay, so here we have the actual, and this is still physically there in Freetown. This is the foundation of the house. Now, obviously, when he saw it, it was a real house in his dreams, and yet from the foundation, he could tell it was the same layout, it was the same area. And then, of course, there's actually a whole, what seems like an abandoned village back there out in Freetown. And this is the path, and he would sometimes see the witch here. And so once they discovered kind of this area, they used to go there all the time, and it used to freak them out, and then they found that the more they went there, the less they had these horrible nightmares. So where do you categorize that? Is that a ghost story? Is that a witch story? Well, I think we're all kind of, especially in this room, educated enough to say, well, witches aren't necessarily evil, it's propaganda, bad PR for the past, 1,000 years. But how would you categorize that? And did it really happen, more importantly? Or, unlike this person who's right here, is it book-worthy? Is that paranormal? Should it be in a book about ghosts? Now, I'm going to read another review for you. You can tell it's going to be long because I'm putting the mic down. Once again, another review of Dark Woods. The term negative energy is used frequently, as though it has some sort of proven existence. Don't mix qualitative statements with quantitative statements of science. At best, it shows a lack of knowledge, and at worst, could be deemed intentional distortion to push an idea or agenda. The agenda being by the book. Repeated throughout the book are excuses for a lack of evidence and a reliance on feel or vibe for a situation. At one point, the claim is presented that your gut is better than your brain for judging some of the situations, he explains. While one could argue that a person's gut is good for the instinctual fight or flight response, it has no ability to analyze a situation. While science is given a token nod in places, the overall theme is that these things are unable to be evaluated by science and are better judged by feeling. Unfortunately for the author, science is more equipped to handle such claims and would do so quickly with the bulk of this work. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and the burden of proof lay with the person making the claims. Testimony, even from authorities, is only useful to corroborate primary evidence. The book reads as though you're hearing these stories over a beer at the local tavern with not much more investigative vigor. I appreciate that from time to time. Thank you for that. The author admits you need to ignore all sorts of plausible explanations to believe some of the stories. I agree wholeheartedly. I would say this book might be good for a budding local skeptic looking to cut their teeth, examining just how vague a claim can be, and how wild writers can get with their suggestions. To paraphrase, emotional energy can punch a hole in the universe to another. Do you guys agree? I don't. Not at all. I think that if you are investigating the paranormal, and actually, Jeff touched upon this on his, sorry we're doubling up. If you are investigating the paranormal, and you ignore feeling, if you ignore things that can't be explained and can't be held in your hand, you're not doing your job fully. There's probably more evidence for things that you can't measure than there is that you can. Okay? These are some of the examples of things that we should look at. And actually, many of you probably don't know, I lost my PowerPoint, so I had to recreate it. So this slide isn't in there, so I'll just talk about it. Curses. How many of you guys believe in curses? One of the first things, kind of mezza, beautiful. One of the first, now of course, long before I ever knew that this was heavy metal, I knew that this protected me. So if someone was being bad to me, I could just go, beep. So imagine a little 3-year-old me going, like that. Now, I first posed that Bristol County especially was cursed. And I got a lot of feedback on that. People liked the story, but they didn't necessarily believe in the curse thing, because they couldn't put their hands on it. They couldn't wrap their investigative tools around it. They couldn't measure it. There's no EMF detector for curse. There's no setting on that. Maybe they have to make a quad meter, I don't know. Here's a list of things that have happened to me negatively when either discussing or investigating the Bridgewater Triangle. Some of you guys might have already known some of these. I call my wife and say, I'm on my way home from the Freetown State Forest, see you in a little bit. My wife almost instantaneously slips, falls down a flight of stairs and through the front door window. Coincidence? A few weeks later, I'm taking a group of BU students, female BU students, out for a tour of the Hockomock Swamp. This is the worst. This is the one that my wife keeps telling me. I think some of you know where this is going. This is one my wife keeps telling me to stop telling people, but I have to. The next day, I have a tick embedded in my belly button so far I have to have it surgically removed by a doctor. I get a call from the man behind the Monster Mash tonight, Tim Banal, several years ago, who asks me, hey, I'm running for Fame Magazine. Can you, see, I'm insulting because he's not in the room. Can you come take me out to the Bridgewater Triangle? I take him out there, and I promptly fall into a ditch. My car has to be towed. Although, oddly enough, we got good stories out of it because the tow truck guys were like, what the heck are you guys doing here? And of course, we told them we were on the search for Bigfoot on Elm Street. I take, not Rising, but Risen paranormal investigator, Jeff Belanger, out so we can track down the mad trucker of Copacut Road. What happens, Jeff?
You were going too fast.
Am I talking too fast? I'm used to having to keep the attention of 15-year-olds who are all trying to flirt with one girl in the class, and so I'm like, ugh. I bottom out. My car the next day kind of explodes. Are all these things coincidences? Every single Monster Mash, my car is broken down. Okay. Last time I was in the Freetown State Forest, I think a lot of people know this one. What happened last time I was in the Freetown State Forest? Locked my keys in the car. How many coincidences does it take to make something or to produce some kind of evidence? It's one of those things you have to weigh. Now, these can all be, well, maybe you're excited, and so these weird things are happening. Maybe, no fool drives down Copacut Road without making sure they're going 2 miles an hour. All those kind of things are in there, and yet there seems to be these areas within the Bridgewater Triangle that have bad things happen to them time and time again. We recycle the negative stuff that's going on. I'm saying negative energy. Uh-oh. That guy who wrote the review wouldn't like it. Nor would people who rely too heavily on their equipment. But here's some other things. Emotions and sensations. These are things you can't ignore as an investigator. They're things you can't dismiss. We want to do that, right? Especially because the television is telling us that unless we have the blinking lights, unless we have the things that we can picture it, we see it physically on the screen, it doesn't exist. And yet, emotions and sensations slap us in the face because they can't be ignored. There's more of them. Such as once in a lifetime. When somebody experiences something paranormal, it's like lightning in a bottle, right? We like to think that, especially because we hail places like Waverly Hills, we hail things like Lizzie Borden House, we hail these paranormal landmarks as places where you can go and you might get some evidence, but the majority of paranormal experiences are one-time things. They happen to someone once. How can you possibly dismiss, how can you possibly get the full picture of what's going on? My plosives are really getting bad here. How can you possibly dismiss any of that or understand the situation that you're in by dismissing that story? You can't get all the information. You have to kind of take those things into consideration. And they might never happen again. You might go over there with all the equipment in the world, and the person might say, nothing's going on. Okay? During an experience, how many of you guys have investigated actively? You're part of a team, or you've just done, how many people have had a paranormal experience? Did you have that feeling in your gut? Did you feel like something was watching you? How do you take a picture of someone watching you, a feeling that someone's watching you? And yet, almost every time I've heard of an experience, there's some element of that. During the incident, there's something that affects your stomach. I've been on investigations where I've walked into a room, my stomach dropped. And I don't consider myself especially psychically sensitive. Or you feel something's burning into the back of your head and you look around and there's nothing there. A lot of people have these experiences both as an investigator we see them, but also people when they experience it. So many stories, and we were talking about this last night, there's a narrative arc to a lot of people's ghost stories. So many of these, the trigger of that, once again, high school teacher, Aristotle's plot diagram, the trigger of the event begins to be they feel something's wrong, they feel something's amiss, they feel like they're being watched. How can you dismiss that? We can't necessarily investigate that whole experience without taking in what they've had happen to them. We can't look at that and see the full picture without kind of knowing that what the genesis of it was. Fight or flight. I don't even know where I threw the paper, but the person accused me of saying, for example, that your gut is more important than what you see with your eyes or what you feel. And he said, well, that might be good for fight or flight. In other words, should I stand up to whatever's here, or should I just run away crying, which is usually my kind of preference. That's more scientific than a lot of the science we use to investigate ghosts. That's your millions and millions of years of evolution. That's how your built-in body system, your body knows when something's going on. Your body knows when you've experienced something similar that had a negative consequence. It's actually something that's ingrained in your personality from your generations and generations and generations ago. And yet over time, we've kind of learned to ignore that. We hear a little voice in the back of our head. I'm not necessarily saying it's a guardian angel or a ghost. We ignore it. We go for what's logical. We're told these things don't exist. We actually suppress our fight or flight. And then, of course, during an investigation, the Bridgewater Triangle especially is famous for things, sensations, emotions that happen during an investigation, but so often they're ignored by investigators. And of course this happens everywhere, but it happens in the Triangle a lot. You experience something, right? You go out, I don't believe in emotions at all, I don't believe in feelings. You've got your headlamp on, you've got your night vision goggles on, you're carrying an EMF meter in one hand, a camera in the other. You can't see anything that's going on. You're relying on technology, and of course technology can take a wider spectrum, and yet you can't see what's right in front of you. How can you possibly observe it if you've basically closed your eyes to what's going on and relied solely on investigative tools to do it? You have to marry the two. So many people have said, well, I don't use anything like that. We never use a psychic, and so therefore, by kind of proxy, I don't believe in my psychic ability when I'm on investigation. And I say embrace that kind of thing. That kind of thing happens all the time, and yet, once again, if we're an evidence-based society, paranormal society, we can't say, well, I got evidence, I felt something. People would laugh at us, that's not real. And yet it might be the most real kind of emotion or real evidence that we get. So I guess I want to end it by, don't worry, I'm not going to read again. I want to end it by putting a call out to actually do this. If you guys are investigators, put your equipment away for a bit, right? You can probably have a chance to investigate a place 2 or 3 times. Once do a walkthrough with no equipment. Once do a walk completely relying on what you're feeling inside. If you're feeling like you should go into a room, go into that room. Mark your emotions down as you investigate. If you're a paranormal enthusiast, think about times when you've kind of had that emotion in there, when you've kind of felt like something was watching you, you felt like something was wrong, or you felt like someone was trying to communicate with you and you suppressed it. Don't suppress it, embrace it. And maybe if we can kind of get the two things going along together, we can kind of have a much fuller picture of what's going on in the paranormal world. So, thank you.
There you go, folks. Boston's own Chris Balzano. And here's the plaque. You guys really are the driving force behind this whole conference. You're the fuel that moves the machine. And we want this show to be as much yours as it is ours. So please send us your feedback. Let us know what you liked and what you want to see more of.